Evolutionary.org, Underground Supplements, episode 19 coming your way. Today we're going to talk about utilizing pre and post workout protein with N2BM. So, in this one, look, we're going to go over what is protein powder. We're going to go over types of protein powder, and we're going to give you the facts. Let you make the decision what direction you want to go with this, or if you want to go this direction entirely. We're going to talk about strategies for using it pre and post workout. We're going to talk about alternatives to protein powder, including things like testosterone boosters and HCGenerate, which comes from N2BM, which might be a good alternative for those of you who want to go that direction. We're going to talk about, we're going to give you the facts on this show. That's what we do on this show. And at the end of the day, you're going to make the decision what we're going to do. So Mobster, he's a wealth of information on this because he used to own a supplement company. So he knows exactly the way the business works, the way the marketing works, the way they produce protein powder. So let's start there, Mobster. What is protein powder? Simplify it in the bro way so that if someone comes
Yes,
up to you
yes.
in the gym and they ask you, hey, Mobster, what is protein powder? Explain what it is. How would you answer that?
You can powderize, you can freeze dry pretty much any food, Steve. You could take beef and you could dehydrate it to the point where it was almost like a crusty thing, and then you could get it in the machine. You could grind it up into a powder type form, and then you could have quote unquote beef protein that way. Now I'm oversimplifying because we could get into chemical processes. We could talk about the mechanical side. The fact that certain powders need to be sprayed, and then as they're sprayed, heat is given to them to sort of get a few particles of the powder to clump together, and so on and so forth. And there is a huge amount of science that goes into proper high quality protein powders versus cheaper low grade stuff. And I know the history going way, way back from Rio H. Blair being one of the first to produce an actual protein powder that might have been useful to bodybuilders. I've used product that was no more than Weider's Weight Gain number 7, was literally skim milk powder, Steve, freeze dried powder of skim milk and sugar. And I didn't know what the fuck it was. And then obviously I started reading the science. I read articles by uh, Kerry Kays from CNP, Brian Batchelor-Dore, who's kind of an industry expert in this country. Some of the experts that were talking about protein powders, including following the whole ephedrine stuff and Orange and all the rest of it, that were invested into the protein product that they produced over Muscle Media 2000 and so on and so forth. And there's even stuff on the quote unquote anabolic window. In simple terms, most protein powders are essentially made from liquids in the case of the dairy ones. Literally, as we have a poem over here, one line of which is called the curds and whey. Curds would be the clumpy, fatty looking particles that are left in a pint of milk that's starting to go off. And the curds are taken to one side and they become cheese. And the clear liquid, it's kind of clear slash a little bit cloudy, is the whey. And just before it starts to go properly rancid, that, as it starts to turn, that liquid is taken off to one side. Now, that used to be poured down the drain. And it was literally taken from companies that were producing cheese, and they would pour into whey products, which was about 15-20% protein, I believe, Steve. And this was going into rivers, and it was killing fish, it was killing vegetation. So the UK government here and other countries elsewhere started to say, listen, you can't pour, and this was not just the protein industry, Steve, the cheese industry, but a bunch of companies literally, as you know, historically used to pour the waste chemicals into rivers. They didn't give a fuck. Or it was poured in some huge, great pool at the back of the factory and was allowed to sink into the soil. And you knew it wasn't doing any good because people could breathe that shit in, they could smell it. People got cancers from some products, the byproducts of oils, the byproducts of hairsprays, God knows what. And this is how things used to be. No one gives a fuck. Make money, pour it into the river, we don't care. So a singular person came up with, I believe, one of the processes which helped them actually do something useful with, in this case, whey protein powder in terms of isolating it. And so, for example, treated with acid, treated with heat. And eventually they got to, I think that was Ion Exchange, they got to a company or another process that was specifically treating with low amounts of heat rather than high amounts of heat, so that they were keeping more of the healthy fractions. And it got very complicated, but also very expensive. The really, really good stuff is arguably twice as expensive or more than the cheap stuff. You and I can find online, even in this day and age, even post-COVID, where the prices are higher than they was before and haven't gone back down. The difference in quality can be still, let me think now, $10 to $20. So a $10 deviation between perfectly normal, standardized whey protein concentrate to a high-end, low heat treated isolate. Now we could get into, and we will touch upon this for the benefit of the listeners, the whole anabolic window thing. Here's the thing, guys, and I want to say this at the front before we talk about other things specifically. The reality of the situation is, and it applies to most of our listeners, so if it applies to you, this is something you can fix. You cannot fix eating crap by having a protein shake straight after your workout. If the rest of your day is a poor diet, fix your poor diet. The anabolic window thing is for arguable, and Steve and I think would agree on this, overplayed. You're not top professional bodybuilders, and you are not dieting down for the place at the Mr. Olympia. So the reality is that the average user would be much better served by eating a small high protein meal. That might be a tuna salad, Steve. It might be pasta and chicken breast. The reality of the situation is a degree of convenience here for most users. And for most users, it's convenient to have a protein shake. Hell, Steve, I do. And the reason I didn't do today is we went to a burger bar straight after the gym. But normally, Steve knows I would have a single scoop or a double scoop of protein straight after my workout. And this is when we get into the whole pre and post workout, which we'll touch upon shortly. So again, guys, food first over protein powders. But let's talk about the specifics. There are different grades. I know that there are low-grade whey protein concentrators used in baking, Steve. In fact, the biggest consumer of whey protein is actually the baking industry in terms of putting a glaze on a bun or loaf of bread. That bit that gives it a nice, shiny... it's also used on pork pies, Steve, in this country. It's the glaze. You can use egg. If you make this stuff yourself, you probably brush it with milk or egg. In the industry, they'll use a low-grade whey protein concentrate, typically 20 to 30% protein. And arguably, Steve, that's still higher than, say, for example, a steak. A steak is about 24, 25 grams as a percentage of protein per 100 grams. So it's actually slightly higher. But when we get into the protein concentrates that we would use, or isolates that we would use as bodybuilders, as athletes, and again, I do this, but the foods will still be better. You'd be looking at stuff like a concentrate needs to be, in this country, Stephen, I think the numbers are the same in America and in Europe. In order to be called a whey protein concentrate as used by bodybuilders, it needs to be at least 80% protein so 80 grams of every 100 grams needs to be protein. Now that can be lowered with the addition of flavoring, sweeteners, colors, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of that goes on. You can lower it so much, it's almost back to 60% Steve. An isolate, by definition, needs to be at least 90% protein per 100 grams. So it's 90 grams per 100 grams needs to be at least that amount. Higher, and there are higher, I believe the highest I've seen is 97. And arguably, you could probably produce something that's 100%, but the moment you took the lid off, a little bit of moisture gets in there, and that would reduce the percentage back down to about 97, 98% protein. And to be perfectly honest, while it's technically possible, if we're talking about percentage difference, it gets fractionally small, tiny, zeros of points, zeros of percentage difference, but the difference is going to make to your physique. So I would argue in terms of protein quality, and Steve knows this again because I've discussed this on the forums, I have my protein powder unflavored. I don't need it to taste of chocolate or vanilla or strawberry. There are some amazing flavors out there, don't get me wrong. But me and Steve talk about the fact that we seem to feel as a society that every single thing needs to taste sweet. It has to taste nice. It must be nice to our palate. Whereas in reality, guys, you train your asses off in the gym. You're not making yourself comfortable. You're not sitting on the sofa at home watching the TV, flicking the remote around. You are literally grinding shit out and making your muscles ache. You're killing it, as we like to say, Steve, sweating your ass off, tearing shit up and all the rest of it. I don't then need something to be sweet and nice for me after training. I can take unflavored protein concentrate, drink, Steve, with just water. I don't even need the milk. Neck that motherfucker and hope it's going straight to the place that I've just broken down, that muscle tissue that needs to be repaired, and job done. If, as I did today, it was not normal for me, it was possible, I would go and have a small protein meal. Macronutrients will be more important. There's carbs, there's fiber, there's other bits and pieces in there. So long as it's high quality protein, that would be better. So what do you think about that, Steve, before we get into the actual different types, including non-dairy options?
Yeah, and all protein powders aren't created equal. And Mobster went over a little bit of that. But look, let's be honest. People who walk into the vitamin shop or they're browsing online, they're going to look for two things. They're going to look for price and they're going to look for taste. And taste, you're not going to know until you try it, unless
Yep.
you're getting word of mouth or you're reading reviews and stuff. And if you look at protein powder reviews online, a lot of people say, oh, this protein powder sucks. It tastes horrible. They'll give it 1-star review. And then people
Because
won't
of the
come back.
flavor. I mean, not the
Yeah.
quality, the
So let
flavor.
me
Yeah.
let me explain, the way things work. Okay. So supplement companies, it's marketing. And protein powder, as Mobster just went over, because it's part of the food industry, as long as they have, they follow those numbers, as Mobster said,
Yes.
they can
Yes.
they can label it as whey protein concentrate or whey protein isolate, which we're going to get into the difference later on, more into the differences later on. But Mobster said 80% versus 90%. That's standard. But what
Yep.
isn't standard is the other stuff they're adding to these products.
Oh God, yeah.
So let's if you go through and you look at what are the most selling protein powder tubs out there, you're going to see the stuff that's in them. So you're going to see things like high fructose corn syrup, although the industry in the past few years has cleaned that up because there's been such an uproar about it. Because we know high fructose corn syrup is causes things like type 2 diabetes and obesity and
Mhm.
other issues. So why in the world would you consume something that's supposed to be healthy, that's supposed to be good for you, that's supposed to help you build muscle, that's going to make you fat, that's going to give you type 2 diabetes, that's going to give you heart disease and all these other products? Doesn't make any sense. So they've done a good job of removing it, but it's still in a lot of products. These other additives and fillers that they add to these products, the emulsifiers. You know what emulsifiers do? They keep the product sitting on the shelf a long time and keep it from spoiling. So when you open up that protein powder for the first time, a little bit of humidity gets in there, it won't go rancid, it won't go bad. You can literally close it up, put it back on your shelf for another 6 months, and it'll probably still be good. What does that tell you? That tells you they're adding emulsifiers to the product and they're adding stuff to keep it sitting on the shelf a long time. So, what do those emulsifiers do? They stop mold from forming, they stop the bacteria from forming. So, what do you think an emulsifier does inside your body? It will do the same thing. It'll kill things in your body, and in the process, it's going to kill your immune system. So we did see this is a big problem in America, Mom. So a lot of these emulsifiers are actually illegal in Britain, but they are damn sure legal in America.
Mm.
And look, at the end of the day, it saves the consumer money. In America, our food is the cheapest in the world. You go to any other country, relative to what people are making, and America is always going to have the cheapest food prices, okay? No matter what people claim. And that's because we allow all these emulsifiers and these additives and these fillers in our food. So that keeps the prices artificially down. Now, if you want to buy more high quality things as a consumer, you're going to be paying more. I've talked about on a previous show the difference between a regular tomato and an organic tomato. An organic tomato in most situations is going to cost more because it costs more to grow.
Yep.
A grass-fed beef is obviously going to cost more than a cheap Walmart piece of steak because the grass-fed beef obviously costs more to raise that cattle, and the farmer makes less money on that cattle because the Walmart cattle that Walmart gets their beef from, he feeds that cattle grain toward the end of its life to fatten it up really good so he can make more money per pound. But the grass-fed farmer, he has to have more land to let his cows graze, and the cows have a much better life. They're free, they're in the sun, and they're eating that grass. Obviously, you've got to have land. You got to have more land. You have to, and the farmer makes less money on that cow, so obviously he has to pass that on to you, so you pay a little more, but you're getting a higher quality product. So at the end of the
Yeah.
day, the normal consumer out there, Monster, from the economic standpoint and from the taste standpoint, they're not going to choose what you're saying. They're not going to choose the unsweetened, high quality, least processed whey protein powder because
Yeah.
it tastes bitter to them. It tastes awful. They want the one that
Yeah.
tastes good. So at the end of the day, most of the protein powder that's sold, at least in America, 95% or more, is basically has the same nutritional benefits as you would just walk into Walmart and buy a $5 tub of ice
Yes.
cream.
Yes.
It's all sugar, it's all additives, it's all fillers,
Yes.
it's dyes, it's all this other crap.
Let me jump back in, Steve. I mean, look, if I want my protein products as a business to get on the shelves of all the big name health food shops and supplement sellers, think about this is for the listeners. Think about how that works. The number one selling protein back in the day, which was by a brand at one point, I believe, was sponsoring Ronnie Common, who just turned was just about to become Mr. Olympia. So you can guess who that the name of the company was a roughly 67% protein. That still meant on a weight for weight basis it had more protein than steak. But it started out as a concentrate. Indeed, there was even a little bit of isolate to take it up a tiny fraction. But then the bits, the things that made it taste nice, the things that allowed it to sit on the shelf, and the things that allowed them to sell it to distributors who then put it into these local shops as well as the big name health food shops. In other words, there was a margin for the company that made it, the, for the distributor, and for that local health food shop and big name health food shop as well. The GNC, the Hollander Barretts in this country, and Walmart, as Steve said, meant that they'd added, I believe the flavor was something like cake batter flavor. In other words, that thing when your mum's made some cakes, a sponge cake or some fairy cakes, and you get to lick the bowl afterwards, Steve. That's what this protein powder tasted like. It appealed to the child in us. It was amazing. It was just like putting your finger in the bowl of cake mix and putting it into your mouth. Thank you very much, Mum. This is fucking amazing. I can't wait for the cake to be cooked. And that's what it tasted like. And that's without the margins, etc., etc. I buy or have bought in the past, Steve. It's just become a little bit more expensive again. Unflavored sacks of whey protein concentrate from a company that sells hundreds of tons of protein. They fortunately still sell to retail by the individual. Hundreds of tons of protein to the bacon industry, and hundreds of tons, certainly tens of tons at a time, to the protein powder industry. And they were the main company that I used, which is why I'm still able to do it as well, when I had my protein company. And we're still looking, I think the last time I looked, Steve, was 20 kilogram sacks, a 44-pound sack was 240 quid because prices have gone up because of COVID. And that was an 80% concentrate. But again, I never sold to shops. Mine was always direct. The manufacturing importer, in fact, of this company, New Zealand Dairy, is imported via this sub company, and I was buying by the pallet load, 1,000 kilos at the time. And we were small companies, Steve. Companies like My Protein in this country, and I believe they're also in the States now. They have to have 3 or 4 different companies like that because they are selling hundreds of tons. And there's another thing people don't understand when it comes to sports supplements. Protein powder is the worst product to sell because your margins are fucking tiny, and especially if you want to put it into local distributors and local health food shops or Walmart or whatever else. Not only have you got to wait 80, 90, 120 days to get paid, you've also got to have it go through the distributor to that company, and the money's got to come back up the food chain. So it's literally an investment in the future. Hoping you're going to get
Shipping as well is
Oh,
very
mate, in
expensive.
America, for example, the protein powder, there's a couple of good companies I could use in America if I lived in the States. But if I lived on the wrong side of the States, 5, 10, 15 pound would cost me $40, $50 to ship across the country, which could easily be the price of the product. And then shipping could be the same price again. So the problem with living in the States, just on that basis, to get a good quality product with very little flavoring. In fact, I can think of one particular company that mixes products according to how you want it on one of their product lines, including protein powders. As you say, direct to retail, good price, yada yada yada, and then shipping from one side of the country to the other side of the country.
Yeah.
And you want to buy 5, 10, 15 pounds of this product at a time, can easily be $30, $40, $50 just to ship it across the country, and taxes as well, Steve. Good grief.
So another thing, I've had supplement company owners come on the podcast back in the day, and they actually said they don't make money on their protein powder. In some cases, they actually lose money, but they say they have to have it in stock because they'll come to their supplement company as a one-stop shop. They don't want, if they don't see that they have the protein powder, they'll go somewhere else.
Yes,
So it's like they
true.
have to, and the same thing with other, products too. They don't make money off of those. but they have to sell it just because they have to have it. It's like you walk into a protein store at the mall and they don't have any protein powder. It's just like, wow, this is really weird. Well, at the end of the day, they may not be making money on that protein powder, but they still want to have it there, just because. And it's the same way in anything, any business, any retail store, whatever. Most of the stuff you walk into a real retail store, most of the stuff that retail companies sell, they don't make money off of. Grocery stores, same thing. Restaurants, they don't make money selling food. Usually they make money selling their desserts and selling their
Or the
alcohol
alcohol.
and
Yes.
yeah, specific things. So, but they
Yes.
have to have certain things or you just get up and walk out. So look, and at the end of the day, let me explain this too. These artificial sweeteners that are in just about all these protein powders, this is what they do because instead of adding sugar, they say came up with the idea, hey, let's add artificial sweeteners. Let that be a good idea. And let's get one over on the consumer because artificial sweeteners don't count as sugar, right? Or they may not count as calories or whatever. But here's the thing with artificial sweeteners, and here's the science. And again, you guys need to make the decisions yourself because a lot of you out
Yes.
there drink diet soda versus soda and think you're doing yourself a favor. Hey, it's 0 calories. But let me explain to you two things artificial sweeteners do to damage your body. Number one, your gut. It damages your gut. It throws up your gut flora. It does other things in your stomach that you don't want. That's what artificial sweeteners do. Number two, they mess with your brain. Okay. Now, it may not seem like a big deal because a lot of things out there mess with your brain. When you watch porn, it messes with your brain. When you smoke cigarettes or smoke pot or do drugs or any type of addiction, go gambling, it fucks with your brain. You get that dopamine effect. So maybe that's not a big deal to you. But here's the thing, any little edge you can get when it comes to your health is important. So messing with your brain and tricking your brain into thinking it's getting sugar when it's not getting sugar, that's not breaking that sugar habit. That's not breaking that
Yeah.
addiction.
Yeah.
So you're doing two things when you take these artificial sweeteners that are in these protein powders is you're fucking with your stomach and you're fucking with your brain. In long term and in the short term, it's not going to do you any good. So keep that in mind. It's always important. Let me leave this topic with this. It's always important to read the ingredients. And if you see ingredients in your protein powder that you're buying, go look at the protein powder right now that you're buying. Look at the ingredients. If you see ingredients that you can't even pronounce, then it's probably not good for you. Okay. Make sure you're using natural ingredients. Like Mobster said, if you want to use protein powder, do what Mobster does. Buy the unsweetened, buy the high quality,
Yeah.
be smart as a consumer, and then just sweeten it on your own. Get some raw
Yeah.
honey
Honey. Honey.
or some
Yes.
raw fruit, just like
Yeah.
oatmeal. You get raw oatmeal. You don't get the oatmeal that's full of sugar and artificial shit that's in it with 10 different ingredients. You get the raw oatmeal and then you sweeten it yourself, right? That's smart. Everybody does that who's smart. But why do we do this with protein powder? Just because your favorite bodybuilder has his face on the protein powder tub, or some marketer online he's the supplement company owner, drives a Lamborghini and he's got girls in the hot tub with him. Okay, it's
Yeah.
marketing.
Yeah. I've
Just
seen
because
him. Yeah.
doesn't mean it's good for you. That guy's not drinking his own protein powder because he knows his own protein powder is shit. It's just marketing. So Monster touched on that for a bit, and then we'll move on to
Yeah.
different types.
I'll move on to non-dairy in a minute, Steve. But yeah, listen, right? In order to make any products, look, this is a classic example, Stephen. I'll use the car industry before we move on, right? So the dream would be for a lot of guys that are listening to the show and a few women, it's actually a growing section of the female population. The idea of owning a small, powerful sports car, and let's use Ferrari as an example, and the classic red Ferrari, the white Lamborghini, the whatever, back in the day. And they do the same advertising for the little cars that most of us used to drive, very, very similar. It's only just now, literally in the last 5 or 10 years, that they've shown you cars nipping around the city. For decades, either A, they would have some dolly bird at a motor show draped over the bonnet, and it didn't matter what car it was a family sedan or a sports car, it'd have a dolly bird, a showgirl model draped over the car. And the other advert they used to use, Steve, was it'd be somewhere like in this country, in Scotland or some Canadian wilderness. There are no other cars on the road. And whether it was a family sedan or a sports car like a Ferrari or Lamborghini, it would be this beautiful open road, might even be in the desert, Steve, some incredibly straight road with no other traffic. And the car's going like the clappers. It's doing 150 fucking miles an hour. Even the sedan is cruising along. and it's just taken from a helicopter or some mountain, looking down in this car, zero cars on the road, freedom of the roads, buy our car, and you can go as fast as you like. In reality, you can't. The police are waiting for you. The sedan won't do 150. And every single time you manage to find that road, everybody else is there exploring the road. Or it's the only road from one village to the next village, and it's got tractors and trucks on it and God knows what else. So they literally had to close the road for the photograph. They had to pay the police to blockade it. And they drove this car up and down 20 times to get the picture and so on and so forth. Protein powder and some supplements are exactly like that. In reality, there's if a standardized, non-flavored product is not sexy. And the sack that I buy when I buy it, or even the 5 kilos of product I bought recently, is not sexy. It doesn't have women draped over the tub of protein. It doesn't have some fantastic muscular athlete on it or whatever else. And it's hard to sex it up. And especially, as Steve says, the reality is that if I owned a supplement company now, I'd make loads more money selling pre-workout. I'd make loads more money with the latest, made out of beetle skin or something, sort of a scientific product. I'd make a load more money on fat burners, those kind of products, versus, say, for example, carbohydrate. That was the cheapest powder we could buy, was the carbohydrate powder. And protein was relatively expensive, and return that we got, I made money. People bought more because I had a set amount of money that I paid for shipping to a shipping company. If they bought more than 2 or 3 tubs, I made more money because I was only paying one rate on the shipping. That's how I made money. I didn't make money on the protein powder, or very, very little. So those are the facts. On the forum, Steve, the question that comes up a lot, and I'll address this now, is dairy versus non-dairy. Now, I'll let Steve come in just for a second here, because, Steve, talk about the impact of dairy products on the adult male and female population.
Yeah, and we're going to get into types of protein powder in minutes. This is a good segue into it because there are 7 main protein powders that Mobster and I are going to kind of go over. This way you can make a decision if you want to go this route. But what happens is, as we get older as human beings, and a lot of this has to do with your evolutionary, your adaptation over time. Now, Mobsters, north of Mobsters, people, it seems to be Northern Europeans are more able to digest dairy than people who are more descended recently from the equator in Africa and Middle East. And and same thing with Asia. People from Asia seem to not be able to digest lactose. But over time, no matter where you're from, we know that a large percentage, we're talking about 70 to 80% of humans, are unable to digest lactose. So what happens in that situation is protein powder companies, a lot of times they've started adding enzymes to their products.
Yes.
So to help break down that lactose. So what happens in the body is lactose, being sugar, goes into your body. Your body can't break it down. Your body can't process it because it doesn't have the enzymes to break it down. So it sits in your stomach, and it causes bloat, it causes gas, it causes diarrhea, it causes loose stool, it causes you to feel nauseous. So if you drink a protein shake and then go try to work out, you will have a really hard time. That's why a lot of people, they drink the protein shake, they go and they do squat day, and then they run to the bathroom with diarrhea because your body wants to get rid of it. It's sitting in your stomach and you're putting your body under stress. So your first instinct to your body is, I need to get rid of it. So it's either going to go one way or the other. And neither way is very fun. So if you're lactose intolerant, you've got to be aware of that. Now, there are, obviously enzymes that you can take that can help break down, but that doesn't always work very effectively because, again, it's even if is able to break down 90% of that lactose, even if 10% is just sitting in your stomach, that's not fun. So you got to be aware of that. So this is the cool thing about there's different types of protein powder. I'm going to go over the 7. And then Mobster and Mobster's the expert.
I'll talk about each one as you bring them up, Steve.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about each one, and he can kind of describe. So I'm going to talk about first is whey concentrate. Now, this is the most popular option out there, and Mobster talked about it earlier. So Mobster, why don't you educate a little bit about whey concentrate, what it is, and
it would probably be the number one seller of protein powders, regardless of additions and applicants and ingredients that have been added to it in the industry, Steve. And it's probably the baseline measure when anybody starts to look at what protein powders are about. But it is, of course, a dairy product. So Again, this was something that you might be able to have on a minimal amount. I would probably restrict, even in me. I've actually taken a lot more back in the day, but I would probably limit myself to 2 scoops of that per day. I might be able to get away with that, especially when I was younger versus being older. And again, I would still want the majority of my protein to come from food. And again, this is an average individual versus someone competing, wanting to get into shape, especially for high-end competitions. On to the next one, Steve.
Whey isolate is the next one. And whey isolate, if you walk into a vitamin shop and you ask the guy, hey, I want something that's going to be easier to digest, he'll usually say, no, stay away from whey concentrate and go with whey isolate. So I've seen protein powders with both, Mobster. I've seen them with both whey concentrate and whey isolate. And I've seen protein powders that just say isolate. So talk about isolate. It doesn't always work, though, because even
the
with
higher
that,
end isolates have a very small amount of carbohydrate in the form of lactose. So you might be looking as little as 0.2%. You want very little moisture in any powder that you're using for the same reason Steve had touched upon earlier on, and I mentioned in terms of the highest percentages and moisture getting into the tub. That's just fact of life. Doesn't matter what powder it is. Arguably, this is easier to stomach. Arguably, companies, I believe one was Isopro, might still exist, and a couple of others. And again, small amount. This is arguably, I would actually take this over any amino acid type product and small amount, perhaps post-workout. Again, this is in reality probably more likely to be used by professional bodybuilder, assuming they couldn't get a post-workout meal in. And again, it might be one of those tiny factors. I will say this, because I mentioned it in the pre-show. When it comes to protein powder of any kind, and when it comes to using the protein powder over a meal, and even the whole anabolic window pseudoscience that was discussed to the cows come home years ago, the whole quick in, quick repair, quick part of recovery, fixing muscle tissue breakdown, etc., was almost certainly the science came from the idea of using isolates. And again, we're talking about a very fractional percentage in the high-end, genetically blessed, competing individual. For the lactose intolerant, this might be one of the options. But if you're going to do that, I would argue that you want to go the highest isolate possible and only use this product post-workout. Don't use it at any other time.
it
Fix your
also,
diet with better food. Go on, Steve.
it's also, per scoop, going to have more protein and less carbs and less fat.
Yes. It has to be 90%. There are higher
90%.
grades. I've seen, as I said, 96, 97, but it needs to be a minimum of 90%. And I'd want that ideally, Steve, actually to be higher. And then you could add some other ingredients to that to bring it back down to 90%. But I'd want 90% as an absolute minimum on that. If I was going to, again, I would prefer unflavored. If concentrate has little flavor, isolate has next to none, and that's because of the very, very low carbohydrate and fat content. Also, one more thing, sorry. In terms of taste texture, concentrate will taste or feel better in your mouth because of the small amount of carbohydrates. Basically, it's going to taste more creamy and therefore more pleasant. Isolate has such low fractions or percentages of fat and carbohydrate. It's almost insipid, Steve. It's just like sort of drinking a thick kind of water for some people, especially with no flavorings. And so literally you are having function over taste and pleasure.
All right, so next one is casein protein. And I think this one got popular back in the day, maybe the 80s and 90s, Mobster. A lot of people were saying, oh, I got to take this before bed. It's a slow digesting protein. And that really, so supplement companies basically started selling you the other proteins, the whey concentrate, and they'd say, take the whey concentrate, post-workout, and then take the casein before bed because you need, heaven forbid, you can't have protein while you're sleeping,
Yeah, exactly.
Your muscles would disappear if you didn't have protein. So talk about casein protein a little bit, Mobster.
Yeah, I mean, there's an old thing about what they call the bolus. The problem with casein is it really clumps up, both in terms of texture when you're shaking the damn thing, and also for obvious reasons when you've ingested it. When it's gone down your throat to your stomach, it literally sits in a bolus, a ball in your stomach, and breaks down very slowly. That's supposed to be an advantage. But as Steve pointed out, okay, if I'm eating a meal late at night, let's say 10 or 11 o'clock, and then I go to bed, naturally my body slows down in all its processes, which includes digestion. Okay, I don't want anything sitting, or I don't want the sensation an event sitting in my stomach, even if it was 100 grams of casein in liquid or whatever state, in milk or in water or whatever, I don't want to feel uncomfortable with a heavy belly in bed. Listen, I'll quote Stan Everdeen on this. When it comes to whether it's fasted training, to quote, fasted cardio, to quote Stan, or having a late night protein shake, he actually said it's more anabolic. This is a recent quote of his, Steve, to have a good night's sleep. Anything that's going to, I'm old enough and big enough that my sheer size disturbs my sleep. I'd probably have a small degree of sleep apnea, being over 300 pounds. Do I want to make that worse by eating, quote unquote, a heavy feeling, heavy sensation to my body type product late at night? And here's the reality. Again, I'll quote Stan on this. If it's better, and Steve and I would agree on this as well, have a good night's sleep for rest and recovery, missing out on food for 8 hours is fuck all. Again, to quote Stan, Steve, and myself, we've talked about nature, we've talked about prehistoric man. If society, as human beings, can't go without something in its fucking gut for 8 hours, then how the fuck do we exist as a society right now? There are times of famine, there are times of feast, there are times where society has recovered, when we were chasing after our food, when we were hunting for our food, when we were searching for food to eat, versus literally being able to go to the fridge or the supermarket or get Uber food delivered or whatever, Steve. The idea somehow that we're going to shrink away to nothing, lose all our gains because we haven't got a bolus of cases sitting in our gut overnight is kind of silly. And to be perfectly honest, you're probably just as better served, assuming that you don't have the lactose issue, of having a nice warm glass of milk high in L-tryptophan as an amino acid that helps you sleep, than you are over in a bolus of cases sitting in your stomach. Does it have its place? Yes. Maybe in a blend, Steve, maybe in a super duper protein, so that you've got fast digesting, medium digesting, slow digesting protein. And again, that is all this science is taken in isolation. Every single argument when it comes to these things is taken a study in isolation. It is not allowed for the fact that you're probably going to have a meal in an hour after your workout, within the afternoon, within a couple of hours. It's not allowed for the fact you had a breakfast before you went to the gym. It's not allowed for the fact you had a meal last night before you went to sleep, and so on and so forth. Every single study that talks about these and protein breakdowns and assimilation and all these things is nearly always done in isolation. Very rarely with a diet of high protein in and of as part of the study. So it becomes complicated. It becomes confusing. So yeah, perhaps a blend with a small amount of casein protein, so that it's just trickling in protein all day long. That idea of that probably appeals, but so does having some steak and some vegetables, and that takes a while to break down. You've got the whole thing, which is another podcast in and of itself, which is transit time, Steve. How long something takes from ingestion, by putting it in your mouth, to excretion, by coming out of your ass or in your piss, to put it crudely. And food would typically have a longer transit time, longer to break down, longer trickling in proteins and carbohydrates and fats into your body, which suits the human digestive tract versus something that's fast and quickly processed and quickly ingested and quickly excreted, etc. So we could get into that as well, Steve, but that's for a topic for another podcast. On to the next one.
All right, so the next one is called soy protein, and this is the most popular option for those who are looking for a plant protein. So it's basically made from ground soybeans that have been defatted, and it digests moderately and has a greater amount of arginine and glutamine. So, but here's the downside. Some people insist that it can have effect on estrogen levels in both genders. So a lot of people, that's the whole thing behind, making fun of people. Oh, you're a soy boy, whatever.
It's the amount, Steve. Soy protein was probably one of the first actual proper proteins that the industry, bodybuilding and sports nutrition ever used, but it wasn't defatted. It was rancid. It was disgusting. It literally still had the fat included, and that meant you could open up the tin or the box or the tub or whatever it came in, and it was rank. And literally sometimes there was like an oil sitting on the top because it hadn't been defatted. We didn't know any better. You want an isolate, 100% you want an isolate. You do not want any other form of this whatsoever. And then the argument for any of these things is the amount. I would argue, Steve, that a scoop for those people that are using this particular option is not going to turn a man into a woman with estrogen issues. It's just not. You're not going to get man boobs because you took a scoop of soy protein isolate. If, again, the amount was large, and you were replacing too many meals with protein shakes with soy, especially concentrate version over an isolate version, through the day, because you was a vegan or a vegetarian and this is the only option that you could stomach, and you didn't want to have all that food because you don't like eating lots of food, then you might arguably, Steve, get into the issue with estrogen. In reality, one fucking scoop, let's say 30 grams, so a little bit over an ounce, containing about 24, 25 grams of protein, a little bit higher for an isolate, straight after your workout is not going to give you estrogen issues, especially because you're not training 7 days a week. So these typically would be 3-4 days a week. You're only looking at around 120 grams of soy protein isolate per week. That's not going to give you man boobs. It's not going to fuck with your estrogen levels. And of course, Steve and I have touched upon this. There's a lot of other things that can fuck with your estrogen levels, including being obese, including piss poor diet, including chemicals in the water and in pollution and whatever else, which are just as likely to affect your testosterone levels. Ironically, we're going to talk about fixing your testosterone, of course, at the end of this show, and actually be more beneficial in modern society versus, for example, the idea of it's an option, but make sure it's a good quality option. Like Steve said, defatted, isolate. And again, it's an option over dairy. So one scoop post-workout versus, for example, if you're extremely dairy sensitive, you're extremely lactose intolerant, this would be an option for you to choose from. There are others, but again, they come with their sides and benefits as well. On to the next one.
So there's three more, non dairy options. There's egg white protein, and I'll talk about that a little bit. This is dried egg whites that have been made into powder form. And this is a good option for those who want to avoid dairy. And then pea protein, this comes from the yellow pea and is used by those who want to avoid most of the other options above. So the downside is that it's not a complete protein option, but look, that's not the end of the world. It's just an option. And then there's hemp protein. This comes from hemp seeds that are nutrient packed. It has fiber and it has omega-3. So a lot of people will stack it with one of the ones above, or you can use it solo if you don't care so much about protein. But these, would be easier for your digestion in a lot of cases if you want to go that route. But look, at the end of the day, look, egg white protein, you're not gonna convince me that egg white protein is gonna be better than an actual egg.
Yeah.
You're not gonna convince me that pea protein is gonna be better than actually eating peas and beans. If you can digest them okay with an enzyme. And then you're not going to convince me that hemp is going to be better, than eating fruits and eating.
They're great alternatives, Steve. I think the reality of any of these things is if I wanted 100 grams of protein, I'd have to eat 400 grams of steak if I wanted it from steak. And it's a volume of food thing. And like I said at the beginning of the show, it's about having something to hand that's easy to carry around in your sports bag. We've even talked about on other shows, people giving strange looks because guys were having healthy meals in an office and not hitting the donuts and cookies that the company provided. And there's an issue there. People don't want to sit in their cars eating a high protein meal. They'd much rather have a protein shake, jump into the car, go to work, go to college, do what they got to do for the rest of the day after the gym.
Yeah.
So
Mobster, at the end of the day, you kind of did a good earlier, talking about pre and post workout, what to take.
Yeah, let's touch upon.
Once you summarize everything, how would you strategize this if someone wants to kind of experiment with these pre and post workout? I'll give you a few minutes.
If you are the average Joe, if you are an average Joe at college or at work or even fucking more or less retired like I am, you don't want to take things in isolation when you think about the science. As an obvious example, Steve, I'm not having a high protein meal when I get up in the morning. I had a bowl of fucking cornflakes when I went to the gym today. It's not even the best thing ever, but it's still carbs. And I've just had probably, as you might see from my log on the forum, a hell of a leg workout today. But then again, I had a high protein meal last night. So think about the food that you have over the course of a day versus literally the singular food that you're thinking about pre-workout. If you was a high-end athlete, if, for example, as per some of our listeners, you've just worked your ass off in your day job, which might be in construction, might be down in the mine, might be the steel foundry, then the idea of what you're about to eat before you go to the gym makes more sense. If you've done a bunch of other physical activities, as for example, if you're a pro ball player, you might have spent the day on the field or in the gym, doing rehab or whatever else, and now you're going to go hit the gym to have an actual workout, it becomes more important. So in those circumstances, because that's where most of the science comes from, I would probably want something no more or less complicated for me because of the nature of my workouts, then something like, and I've done this back in the day when I worked for a living, Steve, I would have roughly 2 hours or 3 hours before the gym, 100-gram flapjack bar of oatmeal, a little bit of honey, maybe some fruit in there. Ideally, if you can make this yourself. And then the same thing about an hour or so, and then I would have a coffee, and then I'd hit the gym. So again, it depends on the nature of your workouts. Mine are fairly short and fairly high intensity. If you like more volume, you might want more carbs in there. You don't want a load of protein, and you don't want especially large meals. I think Steve and I have talked about this on other shows. I'd want a moderate amount of food. Actually, small meal would probably be better. Not a great big, huge English fry up, Steve, and then hit the gym. I wouldn't want to do that. Again, it was just a bowl of cornflakes, cup of coffee, cup of tea, my usual vitamins and bits and pieces, and then I hit the gym. But I had a good load of food last night. I don't want 1,000, 2,000 calories and then go to the gym. As Steve said, that stuff's got somewhere to go. It's either going to come up or it's going to go down, and it's not going to be pleasant. So I'd actually prefer 100, maybe 200 grams total of food. And I'm looking ideally, I think, Steve, about an hour and a half before I go to the gym, with about 60, 70% carbohydrate and the rest made up of protein and carbs. There's an argument for some of that protein to be tissue repairing as you go to the gym. And obviously, that food should have started to break down if it's not fully broken down by the time you hit the gym. In other words, the carbohydrate is available for energy, the fat's available for energy, and also tissue repair, etc., keeping the skin nice and supple, and the protein's available, especially for tissue repair, i.e. post-workout. Post-workout during the workout, so some anabolic process is already kicking off. You don't really want to be digesting food, and especially heavy meal during the workout. You want your food to be functional. And that might mean, instead of the protein, so in the flapjack, Steve, you might have a mashed up old fucking, borderline brown banana as better. You might have a couple of hard-boiled eggs. It doesn't need to be fancy. Post-workout, I'd argue the same. Now, my preference, just for time and doing these shows and the way that I would normally eat, and just probably out of habit, is normally 1 or 2 scoops of protein powder post-workout. However, if I was more organized, if I was better at doing the stuff that me and Steve would advise you, and it sounds a little bit like one of those younger guys that we see at the expo, Steve, a small Tupperware tub with rice, chicken or tuna, salmon, some small amount of vegetables in it. And it doesn't have to be a lot. Might be 600-700 calories at the most, probably 400-500 calories within an hour to an hour and a half after your workout. Doesn't need to be within the first 30 minutes. It certainly doesn't need to be in a quote unquote anabolic window. And again, it's the percentage difference. If I was a competing bodybuilder looking to get myself on the Olympia stage, then I might have a specially prepared meal prepped type meal. And again, most of those are 500-600 calories. Even I might have half of one of those literally sitting in the reception of the gym or in my car in a car park before I go home. And then I would have a normal size 1,800 calorie meal. And again, it's literally that percentage of difference. Very few of us are training to the point where we're crazy sore after every workout. Very few listeners will be competing bodybuilders. So the information, as always in these shows, is given to the majority. That small percentage you might want to do, for example, an unflavored isolate, some kind of amino acid thing. And again, if it's an amino acid stuff, I'd literally be looking for you to be on a very restricted diet, because again, that's the way the science was done in the studies that supported those products being used. It's literally that those persons on a calorifically restricted, protein restricted, carbohydrate restricted, fat restricted diets in extreme sets of circumstances for the study, whereas the reality is 80, 90, 95% of the users and listeners for this show don't need to go to that extreme. And there are a ton of recipes out there. What would your approach, Steve, be, for example, with post-workout? I know you're a big fan of fasting. But what about after your workout before we move on?
Yeah, so it's important to remember the reasoning. And I talked about it earlier. Pre-workout, don't make the mistake of taking something that's going to upset your stomach and destroy your workout. It's amazing how many people continue to do that because they're so brainwashed by the supplement industry into thinking I got to take protein before my workout, and then they can't even get a good workout. They have to run to the bathroom sick. So don't put yourself through that. When it comes to post-workout, remember the reasoning behind taking protein powder. Even guys, who are, at high levels that I know, they're convinced of this. And they tell me, Steve, right after you work out, you got to get your protein shake. It's very, very important. You have a window. And it's just not. The science doesn't support that. But there's two reasons why people think this. Number one, they've been brainwashed by the supplement industry, because the supplement industry has told you you've got to have protein, you got to have protein post workout, or your muscles will shrink, or you won't take advantage of your workout. But the second reason is because professional bodybuilders who are taking tons of steroids, they're taking insulin specifically. Now they take their insulin, now they got to get their quick carbs, they got to get their quick protein to take advantage of that nutrient partitioning effect that they're getting from the insulin. So they'll slam a shake along with their insulin post workout, and they actually create a window by doing that. So what happened was the average Joes, the weekend warriors, and normal guys out there, which is 99% of us who just like going and lifting weights 4 or 5 times a week, we've been convinced that we got to follow what the professionals do. And it's not the case. The professionals are on so much stuff and they're on insulin that for them, it actually does benefit them to get those quick protein. But for you, it's not going to make a difference. Alternately, I would tell you, if you're going to drink a protein shake post workout, do your stretching, wait till your heart rate goes down, wait till your body calms down, the adrenaline calms down, then you can have, one of these shakes with a meal, like Mobster said. That would be more better than just slamming it post workout while your body's still hyped up and your adrenaline is up, because your body's going to have a hard time digesting something that's hard to digest on top of being under stress. So we kind of, at the end of the day, it kind of works against you to do it that way. So that's just something to experiment with and try that out.
That's without getting into the pre and post, sorry, the pre-workouts that everybody's using being even more stimulatory and still in some parts of this, still in your system after you finish training, guys. So think about that. What I want to move on now, Steve, to probably arguably, and we've talked about this in this particular way as well, and it seems a bit of a why we got jumping straight to this, but it's going to make sense when we talk about it. So we're going to talk about product like HCGenerate,
Yeah,
and why we would use this. Now, arguably, as we've discussed on other shows, we say, look at the human being or society as a whole, and we talked about the low testosterone levels compared to our fathers, our uncles, our granddads, and our great granddads. And that's just a matter of fact. On one of the few pieces of information that some of you would argue that you can trust, where the food section of the government, specifically in America, has gone and looked at the nutrient quality of food, looked at the testosterone levels of the older generations compared to the modern generations, looking at the stresses that we're under, the chemicals and pollutions that we're surrounded by, and so on and so forth. And the reality of that situation is that our testosterone levels are as low as they've ever been. Because we talk about on these shows, or the other shows especially that we do, use of anabolics, which for the most part we're talking about testosterones, of course, we know just how important it is. And even going back to what we just discussed with regards to the protein powder, Steve, you mentioned insulin use being the reason why people have to have certain foods straight away after a workout. The difference in terms of protein, specifically using the performance enhancing testosterone, would be that you have a greater uptake of nitrogen. Your body is basically quicker able to repair muscle tissue and so on and so forth. So if we can fix that part, for example, by using a product like HCGenerate to boost our natural testosterone levels and a bunch of other herbs that's in there for other reasons, which are part of the product, that's making you healthy, that makes you want to go to the gym, that makes you want to train your ass off. And even arguably, Steve, as you and I have done on other shows, we talked about the reason why Need to Build Muscle exists as a company. I'll introduce that, but I'll let you talk about that as well. When we say, why was Need to Build Muscle created? Because the guys there wanted to have performance enhancers, products produced that enabled the average Joe, but specifically themselves, when the founders of the companies first put the company together, they wanted products that were effective, not necessarily the best selling on the market, not necessarily the cheapest, but products that worked. As I've used this analogy on other shows, products that do what they say on the tin. So talk about that, Steve, and of course the benefits of using HCGenerate.
Yeah, so HCGenerate is a great option. Look, it's herbals and it's got a mineral in it. So let me tell you what's in it. It's got Fedosia, it's got fenugreek, it's got 3,4-divinol, it's got Bulgarian tribulus, it's got LJ100, and it's got zinc. So these are good ingredients. They're not going to mess with your stomach. It's safe to take it pre-workout. It's not going to stimulate yourself. It's not going to upset your stomach. It's not going to mess with your brain. It's not going to do anything like that, but it's good herbal. So I really like herbals. For me personally, and Mobster has his strategy. I have my strategy. Mobster likes to go with some protein powder, as he talked about. I personally don't mess with any of these powders. I'm following a natural diet of natural ingredients. So for me, HCGenerate is perfect because HCGenerate is natural herbs that are found in nature. You can go into the woods and pick up some Fedosia or pick up some Tribulus. You can find it in the woods somewhere, right? So for me, it makes more sense to stay more natural. So for me, I like taking HCGenerate 1 to 2 hours before sex or the gym, and it gives me a boost to both. And it doesn't mess with my stomach. You could take it on an empty stomach. You could take it on a full stomach. It doesn't matter. So HCGenerate is a great option for any of you. If you've tried these different powders, it just doesn't agree with you. You're getting, it's just not working for you. The last time I had protein powder was about, I'd say, um, about 12 years ago, and I
Yeah, yeah.
drank it. And I remember I drank a cup of it, and then right away I ran outside and got on my hands and knees and just dry heaved like 3 times. It just doesn't agree with me. Okay, so if it doesn't agree with you, don't drink it. But HCGenerate, I can take 5 caps of HCGenerate, and it doesn't mess with me, so I'm fine. So how am I supposed to go and work out when I'm drinking something that causes me to get on my hands and knees and dry heaves? How does that make any sense? So that's a
I
good
like the fact
alternative.
I like the fact, Steve, that they've done very little upgrading of the actual ingredients. I think they've changed the formula twice, minimal changes over the last 5, 10 years. They've just redesigned the product in terms of the actual label and presentation, but they've kept the foundation parts of the product absolutely solid. They manipulated a couple of the small variables, but if you look at the original product and the product from a few years ago to now, very little changes. If you've done anything, Steve, have added to the product ingredient list to improve it. I mean, just on the zinc alone, Steve, just the zinc alone that you mentioned as one of the main ingredients there is great for tissue repair, great for scar tissue, great for post workout recovery. Just on its own.
Testosterone, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Gotta
the
have zinc
testosterone.
to have
Yeah, I
testosterone.
mean, yeah,
So
just exactly as a foundation part for
yeah,
actual mild testosterone boosting,
yeah.
but that's
And
in
also,
combination with everything else.
and the 3,4-divinol does a great job of, let's say you're on cycle. How can HC
Yes.
Generate help you? Because when you're on cycle, the 3,4-divinol actually help bind the SHBG. So it actually help your entire cycle run
Yeah.
better. So whether
Boosting
you're
free
on,
testosterone. Yeah.
yeah, if you're on or off cycle, or if you don't use steroids at all, or you do use steroids, it doesn't matter. AC Generate is beneficial for you in that situation. So
In the
we're
PCT, Steve, people talk about losing their gains when they come off cycle. We will talk about the benefits of a good PCT, helping you maintain your gains. And we know for a fact that HCGenerate is great because, like Steve's talked about, the blood numbers, literally seeing blood tests of people that have used this product and one of the other products that they produce, seeing the numbers that people have produced in their blood test post cycle, off
yeah.
cycle, and seeing the difference products like these have made.
So N2BM is the one that created AC Generate. It's a number 2 selling product that they have behind N2 Guard, and it's been around for almost 20 years. And people have been using both N2 Guard and AC Generate on and off cycle for years. And they are great products. So you can check them out at n2bm.com. And N2BM was started by an Army veteran and
Yep.
also by a immigrant, and they kind of came from 2 different worlds. One was an American in the army, other one was an immigrant, and they worked together to create this amazing company N2BM, and they founded the company. And look, it's one of the best supplement companies out there. What I like about N2BM, you guys are gonna love this, and you guys and gals are gonna love this, is they don't use the Lamborghinis. They don't use the hot chicks in the hot tub. They don't use bullshit marketing to try to convince you to buy their products. Their products sell based on word of mouth. And Mobster and I, we've been using their products for years, and they're very important products. You can come on the forum and actually see. I post pictures of my
Yes.
N2BM touchdowns on the forums, and others have posted pictures as well. And they are a great product. And look, at the end of the day, the products definitely work, and they work incredibly well, and they're high quality. And at the end of the day, when you use N2BM products, it's going to benefit you, do nothing but benefit you when you use their products. So they're an excellent company, and we're really, really lucky that companies like this actually exist in the supplement industry because that's hard to find. So, Mobster, 1 minute left. Give your final word on N2BM, and then take us to the disclaimer.
Listen, guys, again, like Steve says, investigate, do your own research, think about the company's products. If for example, you think, oh, Stephen and Mobster are talking out of their asses, you can literally look at the ingredients, look at the numbers, look at what's been included, look at the ratios, think about the synergy of the ingredients. You can literally go away and say, in HCGenerate, what's in there that's going to benefit me, and pick 3 ingredients and go off and research them for yourself. Look at the amounts that were used in studies, look at the results people have had, and then come back and look at the product itself and say to yourself, how does that compare? Look at, for example, Steve, and I've done this on another show where we compared 3 or 4 companies that were producing similar products, and I couldn't work out why some of them had the numbers of ingredients. One had 6 ingredients in and was a third of the price. Another one had 4 ingredients and was like $5 or something ridiculous, and was quoted as being as good as, and go, how is that even possible? In order to get the ingredients in the ratios of the quality, the seed, the leaf, the stem, etc., sometimes they have to wait. I know, for example, Steve, they produced 10,000 bottles and they've sold out in a matter of weeks. And then you haven't been able to get the product for months because they've had to wait for the ingredients to become available for them to produce the product with the company that makes it for them, the actual formulation in the way that they wanted it done, in order for it to produce to the same level of quality, because they didn't want to make shortcuts. They didn't want to replace an expensive ingredient with a cheap ingredient. So keep that in mind, guys. Do your own research. You don't even have to take our word for it. Please note, we are not doctors, and the opinions are ours. It's our view based on our experience and views on the topic. And podcasts are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.